Now we actually get to the how did the USA become a thing? How did they get to be independent from Britain? And it all began with a thing called the Boston Tea Party. There's a picture of it above my head. The Boston Tea Party was essentially began when, as you saw with the taxes that Britain was bringing in the last lesson, Britain decided to tax tea. Tea earned quite a lot of money in the USA, and the thing is, USA was sick of it. They'd had so much tea so much things been taxed. They were like, right, they care about tea. They want to earn money off tea. We're going to dump the tea in the sea. So they snuck aboard a ship containing a massive amount of tea, like a load of Americans. They even dressed up as indigenous Americans as like a political statement. And they picked up 11,000 pounds worth of tea and dumped it in the harbour, just to anger the British and waste their money, essentially. And the way Britain responded to this was to use their soldiers to like lock down the harbour and they established a curfew, locked everyone in their homes, and the Americans were like, and began to basically start meeting in secret to decide how to annoy Britain more, or even how to, should we say, break away from Britain now. They think there was a beginning of some sort of riot, and it actually kind of began this War of Independence. See, a group of Americans got together, they called themselves the First Congress, and they basically formally said, we as Americans believe that Britain should not control us anymore. We want to establish the United States of America, and we want to rule ourselves. This began a war, 5 years of fighting for this War of Independence. It was led by George Washington as the first president of the USA. You can see here is one of the generals of this time. But these battles were hard fought and nasty. The US soldiers had to fight with what's called guerrilla warfare. They weren't fighting like in a war context with loads of armies against each other. They would sneak behind enemy lines and blow stuff up, or kill people in secret, or stab people while they're sleeping. That's what guerrilla warfare is. And the British had a really hard time of it. If you can imagine, there's a war happening miles and miles away, and every single thing you do is going to be 2 months late because it takes 2 months for the boat to arrive. So they were sending soldiers and soldiers and soldiers and spending loads of money to get all their army across to the USA to have this war. After 5 years, as you can imagine, the USA won. They'd succeeded. Loads of things had gone down during that, including a thing called the Battle of Yorktown. If you've watched Hamilton, you'll know a fair few of those moments. But essentially, Britain lost its colony. Britain gave up the USA, and it allowed the USA to become its own country. See, the question is, though, because we're thinking about Britain here, is did that affect Britain at all? Because the thing is, Britain spent £80 million fighting the War of Independence. That's hot. They obviously really cared about the USA, didn't they? But the thing is, if they were to win that war, what would they save? Control of the USA and trade with the USA. The thing is, even after the War of Independence, Britain and the USA still continued to trade stuff. They still continued to buy and sell stuff from each other. And the thing is, within a few years of the War of Independence ending, trade was back to as if it had never stopped. So Britain was just earning as much money as it had before. And so Britain was like, I lost the USA, but the thing is, we've trained in war quite a lot now. We've got the best navy in the world. Why don't I get some more colonies to make up for the loss of the USA over there? So they move over to the Caribbean and South America and Australia and even India and Canada. They go over to these areas and begin to colonize them instead, creating an empire that spreads most of the world. See, I want you to look around onto pages 40 and 41 in your textbook to try and find that information. So here's your questions for today. What was the Boston Tea Party? How did the War of Independence break out, and what were the major events of it? Was Britain hurt by the loss of America on its empire? And one other country in 4041, how did it fare after the War of Independence? Look through your textbook, find it on Teams, but please, just make sure you know, how did the USA get independence, and did it even matter for Britain at all?